The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art glittered, but not as brightly as the diamonds on the women or the contempt in Grayson Vanderbilt's eyes. He stared at the necklace his wife Annalise had worn. It wasn't Cartier, it wasn't Van Cleef, it was hers, handmade. A curious, sunset-colored stone cradled in twisted silver. He laughed a sound that cut through the polite chatter. "My dear," he said loud enough for the trustees of the Whitney to hear, "did you win that in a claw machine? Please take it off. You're embarrassing the family name." This single moment of public humiliation was not the end of Annalise's story. It was the catalyst that would ignite a fire, transforming her from a society wife into the titan of a billion-dollar empire built on the very stone he mocked. The air in the Vanderbilt penthouse on Park Avenue was always thin-scrubbed of emotion and thick with the scent of old money and white orchids. For Annalise Rosenthal, it had been a beautiful prison for 7 years. Her marriage to Grayson Vanderbilt IV wasn't a love story. It was a merger. Her family had a respectable name in academia, but no real fortune. Grayson's family, the Vanderbilts of shipping and banking fame, had a fortune so vast it was practically a character. In their lives, a demanding patriarch dictating their every move. Annalise's role was simple: be beautiful, be silent, and produce an heir. She had succeeded at the first, perfected the second, and failed so far at the third. Her quiet rebellion came in the form of a small workshop tucked away in a spare room overlooking the less fashionable side of the building. There, with a simple torch, pliers, and sheets of silver, she made jewelry. It wasn't a hobby, it was a language. Each piece was a story, a feeling she couldn't otherwise express. She'd spend hours sketching designs inspired by architectural details she'd see on her lonely walks, or the unique mineral inclusions she'd find in stones bought from obscure dealers online. It was the only part of her life that was truly hers. The piece that would end her marriage was born from a place of deep sentimentality. It was a necklace centered around a peculiar stone she had bought for $75 from an old man's stall at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. He'd called it a fluke sapphire, too strange in color to be valuable. It was a mesmerizing stone, the color of a tropical sunset, shifting from a fiery orange pink to a soft lavender, depending on the light. It reminded her of the one happy memory she had with Grayson, a fleeting sunset they had watched in Bali on their honeymoon before the weight of his name had fully descended upon them. She framed it in a nest of hand-wrought, oxidized silver, designed to look like a thorny protective branch. It was her heart translated into metal and mineral. She decided to wear it to the annual preservation gala at the Met. It was a bold move. The Vanderbilt women were expected to be draped in the family's vault collection, heavy historical pieces from Graff and Harry Winston that felt more like shackles than adornments. When she came down the grand staircase, Grayson's face, usually a mask of handsome indifference, tightened. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low and serrated. "I made it," Annalise said, a flicker of pride in her voice. "The stone reminded me of Bali." His eyes went flat. "It's sentimental junk. We're going to be photographed with the Rockefellers and the Lauders tonight. You will not wear that thing. Go upstairs and put on the Bulgari sapphires." "No," she said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "I want to wear this." Grayson's jaw clenched. He saw her refusal, not as a matter of taste, but as an act of defiance, a crack in the perfect facade of his life. He said nothing more, but the fury radiated from him, a cold aura that followed them into the chauffeured Bentley and through the flashbulbs on the museum steps. The humiliation, when it came, was masterful in its cruelty. They were standing in a circle with a US senator and a famous contemporary artist, Catherine Sachs. Catherine, known for her sharp eye, leaned in slightly. "Annalise, what a fascinating piece. The stone is extraordinary. What is it?" Before Annalise could answer, Grayson let out his booming laugh. It was a performance designed for maximum impact, a fascinating piece of what Catherine Annalise has a charming little hobby. She makes trinkets. He turned to Annalise, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. My dear, did you win that in a claw machine? It's sweet, but it's hardly appropriate for the Met. He then looked at the others, his smile wide and apologetic. You'll have to forgive her. She has a creative soul. Please, he said, his voice dropping, but still audible to everyone in their circle. Take it off. You're embarrassing the family name. Put it in your purse. The air froze. The senator gave a tight, uncomfortable smile. Catherine Saxe's eyes widened, a flicker of pity crossing her face before she looked away. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye was on her, on the necklace, on her shame. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution of her identity. He hadn't just called her necklace cheap. He had called her cheap. Her one private act of creation, her one piece of herself had been held up and declared worthless. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. A strange, chilling calm washed over her. She looked Grayson directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw something other than placid obedience. He saw a stranger. Without a word, she unclasped the necklace, its silver cool against her hot skin, and dropped it into her small beaded clutch. The rest of the night was a blur. She smiled. She nodded. She sipped her champagne. But inside, a 7-year dam of resentment and unspoken pain had shattered. She wasn't a Vanderbilt anymore. She was just Annalise Rosenthal, a woman holding a cheap stone in a ridiculously expensive purse. When they got home, the silence in the penthouse was screaming. You will never pull a stunt like that again. Grayson began untying his bow tie. You're right, Annalise said, her voice even. I won't. I want a divorce. Grayson stopped. He turned to look at her, a flicker of surprise followed by pure derision. A divorce? On what grounds that I saved you from looking like you shopped for your jewelry at a street fair? On the grounds that I'd rather live in a studio apartment in Queens and be myself than live in this mausoleum and be your accessory. His laughter this time was genuine and far crueler than it had been at the party. Don't be ridiculous. You have nothing. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You signed it. You walk away with the clothes on your back and a one-time settlement that wouldn't cover your Neiman Marcus bill for a single season. You'll come crawling back within a month. We'll see, she said, walking past him and towards the guest wing, where she locked the door. The Vanderbilt divorce was swift and brutal. Grayson's lawyers, a pack of sharks from Sullivan and Cromwell, painted her as an unstable, ungrateful woman. The prenup was indeed ironclad. As he had predicted, she was left with a fraction of what people assumed. The tabloids had a field day branding her the jilted jeweler. She moved out of the Park Avenue Palace and into a small, pre-war one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that her settlement barely covered for a year. The silence was no longer screaming, it was just empty. She was alone, 32 years old, with a bruised reputation and a future that was a terrifying blank slate. In her small jewelry box, amidst the few designer pieces she was allowed to keep, sat the thorny silver necklace, its sunset stone seeming to mock her. It was the reason for her ruin, or so she thought. The first few months of Annalise's new life were a study in grey. The vibrant colours of the society pages were replaced by the monochrome reality of budgeting and grocery shopping. The catered lunches were gone, replaced by toast and coffee. The stream of invitations dried up to a trickle, then stopped completely. She was a ghost in the city that had once been her stage. Her days were long and empty, the silence of her small apartment a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She sold off the designer bags and shoes. Grayson had let her keep the cash, a temporary buffer against the encroaching panic. Her gaze kept returning to the necklace. It sat on her dresser, a beautiful, painful artifact of her public execution. She hated it. She hated what it represented, her naivety, her husband's cruelty, her fall from grace. One rainy Tuesday, with her bank account dipping to a new terrifying low, she made a decision. She would sell it. Even if it was just for the silver, a few $100s was better than nothing. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She didn't go to the flashy jewelers in the Diamond District on 47th Street. The thought of their condescending eyes was too much to bear. Instead, she remembered a small dusty shop she'd once passed on a side street in Greenwich Village. It had a faded hand-painted sign that read Chadwick & Sons, Gemology and Antiquities. There was no Sons in sight, only a stooped elderly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, who looked as ancient as the artifacts in his window. She pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead. The shop smelled of old paper metal polish and dust. The man at the counter looked up from a loupe through which he was examining a Victorian-era cameo. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly but kind baritone. I'd like to sell this," Annalise said, her voice barely a whisper. She laid the necklace on the worn velvet counter. Her hands trembled slightly. The man, Arthur Chadwick, picked it up. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He didn't look at the silverwork first, as she expected. His eyes were immediately drawn to the stone. He turned it over and over, holding it up to the weak light filtering through the window, then under the bright, focused beam of his desk lamp. He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The silver is lovely," he finally said, his gaze still fixed on the stone. "Delicate work, very organic. But this stone, where did you get this?" "A gem show in Tucson. A while ago. The seller said it was a fluke sapphire," Annalise explained, feeling the familiar sting of embarrassment. "I know it's not worth much, but I was hoping the silver—" "Not worth much," Arthur interrupted, looking at her over the top of his glasses for the first time. There was a strange intensity in his eyes. "My dear girl, the man who sold you this was either a fool or a thief who didn't know what he was stealing." He placed the stone under a microscope, fiddling with the focus knobs. He muttered to himself words like pleochroism, rutile silk, and uncharacteristic crystalline structure. Annalise stood awkwardly, assuming he was just being dramatic. After another 5 minutes, he pushed himself back from the microscope and took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at Annalise, his eyes wide. "This is not a fluke sapphire. This is a Padparadscha sapphire." "A what?" "Padparadscha. It's Sinhalese for lotus blossom. They are the rarest and most valuable of all sapphires. They have a very specific, delicate balance of pink and orange. A true Padparadscha is worth more per carat than a fine diamond. But this—" He trailed off, picking up the stone again. "This is something else entirely. I've never seen one that shifts color so dramatically. It's almost as if it has the color change properties of an alexandrite, but in the Padparadscha spectrum. It moves from lotus pink to a deep, fiery sunset orange. It's a chameleon." Annalise stared at him, uncomprehending. "So, it's valuable?" Arthur let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Valuable, young lady, the Hope Diamond is valuable. A Monet is valuable. This is singular. It's a geological anomaly. It's a new classification of gemstone. A 12-carat Padparadscha of fine quality might fetch $500,000 at auction. A stone like this, with this unique documented color change phenomenon, I can't even begin to put a price on it. It's a specimen stone of museum quality. To a collector, to a house like Cartier, or a scientific institution like the GIA, this stone is priceless." Annalise felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "Priceless. The man sold it to me for $75. "Then today is your lucky day," Arthur said, his expression turning serious. "But it's also a dangerous day. A stone like this doesn't just get sold over the counter. It needs to be certified, documented, and handled with extreme care. There are people who would kill for a stone like this." The irony was so thick, she could have choked on it. The cheap stone. The trinket she won in a claw machine. The source of her greatest humiliation was in fact a treasure of unimaginable worth. Grayson's mockery echoed in her head, but now it sounded different, not like the pronouncement of a king, but the braying of an ignorant fool. He, with all his inherited knowledge of luxury, with his family's vaults of important jewels, had stared at a miracle of nature and seen nothing but junk. He had judged its value based on its setting, not in a famous designer's platinum, but in her own humble silver. "What do I do?" Annalise asked, her mind reeling. Arthur saw the panic and confusion in her eyes. He saw the faint bruises of exhaustion under them, the expensive but slightly worn coat, the story of a woman adrift. "First," he said, his voice softening, "we get this properly documented. I have contacts at the Gemological Institute of America. We need to get a full report, a monograph. This will be its birth certificate, and it will be in your name. Annalise Rosenthal. Secondly, you need to decide what to do with it. You could sell it. A private sale to the right collector could set you up for life, for many, many lives." He paused, looking from the stone to her face. "Or you could do something else." "What else? A stone like this isn't just a commodity." Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a passion she recognized. It was the same passion she felt in her workshop. "It's a muse. It's the cornerstone of a legend. A woman who discovers a stone like this, who has the eye to see its beauty when no one else did. A woman who can craft a setting for it with her own hands. That woman doesn't just sell the stone, she builds a kingdom around it." In that dusty, forgotten shop, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's treasures, Annalise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. But it was more than that. It was a fierce, burning sense of purpose. Arthur Chadwick hadn't just appraised her stone, he had appraised her, and for the first time since her world had crumbled, someone had seen her true worth. Selling the stone would be an ending. It would be money security, a comfortable, quiet life. It would be a final, silent victory over Grayson. But building something, that would be a beginning. It would be a roar. "Tell me more about building a kingdom," she said, her voice no longer a whisper. The decision was made. Annalise would not sell the stone. The Rosenthal Chameleon, as the GIA officially named it in their stunning monograph, would not be a quick payday. It would be her seed capital, her silent partner, her statement of intent. The GIA certification process was arduous and exhilarating. Arthur Chadwick guided her through it, his connections opening doors that would have been welded shut to a woman with no industry credentials. The final report was more than a document. It was a validation. It described the stone's unique triclinic crystal system and the trace elements of manganese and chromium that caused its unprecedented color shift, officially valuing it for insurance purposes at a staggering 18 million. The number was so absurd, it felt like fiction. Annalise, however, did not sell. Instead, she leveraged. She, with the GA certificate and Arthur as her venerated advisor, she secured a heavily collateralized loan against a fraction of the stone's value. It wasn't the full $18 million. No bank was that audacious, but it was enough. She walked out of a private bank, not with a check, but with a credit line of $4 million. It was the most terrifying and liberating moment of her life. Her first move was not to rent a lavish office or hire a firm. It was to fly to Antwerp, the world's diamond capital, with Arthur. But she wasn't there for diamonds. She was there to meet the cutters, the brokers, the families who dealt in the rarest colored gemstones. Guided by Arthur, she didn't go to the big sterile exchanges. She went to the small multi-generational workshops in the back alleys, where masters who could trace their lineage back centuries still cut stones by hand and eye. She didn't buy what was fashionable. She bought what spoke to her. She bought a suite of unheated lavender spinels from Burma that glowed from within. She bought a seafoam green tourmaline from Mozambique that was so heavily included with fibrous crystals it looked like a frozen storm. She acquired a parcel of raw, uncut emeralds from a small Colombian mine, not for their clarity, but for the dramatic dark carbon gardens trapped within them. The established houses would have rejected these stones as flawed. Annalise saw them as having character. She believed perfection was sterile. The flaws were the stone's signature, its story. This became the core philosophy of her brand. She named her company simply Annalise. All caps, no frills, a declaration. Her next target was an investor. The bank loan was for materials and setup, but to build a global brand, she needed strategic capital and expertise. She set her sights on one person, Isabelle Marot, the notoriously shrewd head of Marot Capital, a venture fund specializing in disruptive luxury. Isabelle was known as the Ice Queen of Parisian finance, a woman who had built her fortune by betting on underdog brands and then molding them into powerhouses. She rarely took meetings without a seven-figure introduction. Annalise got the meeting through sheer audacity. She sent a courier directly to Isabelle's office on the Place Vendôme. The package contained no business plan, no pitch deck. It contained a single perfect lavender spinel set in a simple temporary silver ring she had made herself, and a handwritten note, "Perfection is boring. Let's have a conversation about the beauty of the imperfect. Annalise Rosenthal." 2 days later, she was summoned to Paris. Isabelle Marot's office was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and grey marble overlooking the glittering jewelry houses she so often competed with. Isabelle herself was in her late 40s, with razor-sharp black hair and eyes that seemed to conduct a full financial audit in a single glance. "You have 10 minutes, Isabelle said, not bothering with pleasantries. The spinel sat on her desk. "Your stone is intriguing. Your method of introduction is either arrogant or brilliant. Convince me." Annalise didn't talk about profit margins or market share. She told her story. She spoke of her workshop in the Vanderbilt penthouse, a secret garden of creativity. She talked about the soul of stones, how the inclusions in an emerald were a fingerprint of the earth itself, how the subtle color variations in a sapphire told a story of its violent volcanic birth. She laid out her vision, a luxury jewelry house that celebrated not flawless cold perfection, but character narrative and the raw, untamed beauty of nature. Each piece would be one of a kind, built around a unique stone, its design an extension of that stone's intrinsic story. "The world doesn't need another Tiffany's," Annalise said, her voice steady. "We don't need another showcase of massive flawless diamonds that say nothing but, 'I'm rich.' People, a new generation of discerning women, are craving authenticity. They want a piece of jewelry that is as unique as they are, a piece that has a soul. We will not sell jewelry. We will sell talismans. We will sell stories." She finished by sliding the GIA monograph for the Rosenthal chameleon across the desk. "And this is our legend. The stone my ex-husband called cheap. It will not be for sale. It will be the heart of the company, the crown jewel of our private collection, a symbol of seeing value where others see none." Isabelle was silent. She picked up the spinel again, turning it in the light. She read the cover of the GIA report. She looked at Annalise, her face unreadable. "The luxury market is built on heritage and perception," Isabelle finally said, her tone clinical. "You have no heritage. Your perception is currently that of a tabloid figure. Your ex-husband is a Vanderbilt. They could crush you with a single press release." "Let them try," Annalise replied, her chin held high. "They represent the old guard, the idea that value is dictated by a name brand and a price tag. We represent the new world where value is intrinsic, personal, and authentic. Their attack will only amplify our message." A slow smile spread across Isabelle Marot's face. It was the first crack in her icy facade. "You are either completely insane or you are the future. I find both possibilities profitable." She stood and extended a hand. Welcome to the Place Vendôme, Ms. Rosenthal. Let's go build your empire. The next year was a whirlwind. With Isabel's backing, Annalise established her atelier not in a flashy storefront, but in a private appointment-only salon in a historic Soho loft. She hired a small team of master jewelers, artisans, who felt stifled by the rigid designs of the major houses and yearned for creative freedom. She was a demanding creative director, obsessing over every detail from the exact alloy of 22-carat gold they used warmer and richer than the standard 18K to the hand-stitched silk pouches each piece was delivered in. The first collection, Origin, was unveiled not at a splashy party, but through a quiet exclusive, showing for a handful of influential editors, stylists, and private clients. There were only 30 pieces. One was a ring featuring the storm-tossed Mozambique tourmaline, set in blackened gold, that climbed the stone like lightning. Another was a pendant with a Colombian emerald, its internal garden enhanced by a halo of tiny raw diamond crystals looking like captured dewdrops. The response was electric. The pieces were unlike anything else on the market. They were bold, emotional, and unapologetically unique. An editor from Vogue Paris called them living sculptures. A powerful high-tech billionaire known for her iconoclastic style bought 3 pieces on the spot. Annalise was born. It was a quiet birth, but the shockwaves were beginning to spread. Up on Park Avenue, in a penthouse filled with perfect orchids and passionless jewels, the news was received first with derision, then with a flicker of annoyance. Grayson Vanderbilt read a small feature on the brand in a trade magazine and scoffed. His little ex-wife was still playing with her trinkets. He had no idea that the cornerstone of her new empire was the very stone he had tried to shame her with, and that the kingdom she was building was designed to cast a very, very long shadow. The growth of Annalise was not explosive. It was a slow, inexorable burn that grew hotter with each passing season. Isabel Marot's strategy was masterful. They eschewed traditional advertising, focusing instead on strategic placements and cultivating an air of exclusive mystique. Annalise's creations began appearing in the wild, but only on the most discerning tastemakers. The first major coup came during awards season. A-list actress Scarlett Johansson, known for her sophisticated and slightly edgy style, eschewed the usual offerings from the heritage brands. On the Oscars' red carpet, she wore a single, breathtaking piece from Annalise, a cuff earring that climbed the length of her ear, crafted from warm yellow gold, and featuring a cascade of honey-colored sphene, a gemstone known for its fiery dispersion, which Annalise had sourced from a small mine in Madagascar. It was a statement. The piece was discussed on every fashion recap, praised for its originality and artistry. When reporters asked who the designer was, Johansson smiled and said, "It's an Annalise. You wouldn't know her, yet." That single quote was worth more than a $10 million ad campaign. Suddenly, "It's an Annalise" became a whisper, a piece of insider jargon among the ultra-wealthy and the fashion-forward. The brand was no longer just a curiosity, it was a phenomenon. Forbes ran a feature titled, "The Alchemist of Soho, How Annalise Rosenthal is Turning Flawed Gems into High-Fashion Gold." The article touched upon her divorce, framing the cheap jewelry story, not as a humiliation, but as the brand's heroic origin myth. In the Vanderbilt sphere, the news was now impossible to ignore. Grayson first saw the Forbes article on his tablet while breakfasting on the terrace of his penthouse. His new partner, a woman named Cassandra Davenport, whose family fortune was in pharmaceuticals, slid the tablet back across the marble table. "Isn't that your starter wife?" Cassandra drawled, her voice smooth and polished. How quaint, the alchemist of So. A bit dramatic for someone selling glorified arts and crafts. "Don't you think?" Grayson forced a chuckle, but a knot of irritation tightened in his stomach. He remembered the necklace from the Met. He remembered its strange sunset-colored stone. He scanned the article, his eyes catching the valuation of her company, a speculative but nonetheless jarring number. It's a fad. The fashion world loves a sob story. It will burn out in 6 months. But it didn't burn out. The waiting list for a bespoke Annalise piece grew to over a year. Annalise opened a second private salon in a secluded courtyard off the Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris, and a third in a discreet penthouse suite in Hong Kong. She was selective about her clients, cultivating a base of women who were leaders in their fields, artists, scientists, CEOs, and philanthropists. She wasn't just selling them jewelry, she was anointing them into a tribe. To own an Annalise piece was to signal that you had taste, individuality, and substance. It was a rejection of the kind of cookie-cutter luxury that the name Vanderbilt represented. The real shift in Grayson's perception came during Art Basel in Miami. He and Cassandra were attending the exclusive VIP preview, a sea of collectors and billionaires. Across the room, he saw an old business associate, a formidable German industrialist named Friedrich Hoffmann, talking to a woman. The woman was Annalise. She was not the timid, deferential creature he had known. She was poised, dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut black dress. Her only adornment, a pair of earrings made from raw geometric pyrite crystals set in gold. She was laughing, holding Hoffmann's attention completely. Then Grayson saw it. On the wrist of Hoffmann's elegant wife, Helga, was a bracelet. It was a massive cuff of hammered gold, centering a single enormous seafoam green tourmaline, the very one Annalise had bought in Antwerp, the one that looked like a frozen storm. It was magnificent, a piece of primal savage beauty. It made the flawless 10-carat diamond bracelet on Cassandra's wrist look sterile and predictable by comparison. "Is that?" Cassandra began, her voice tight with disbelief. "Helga, darling?" she called out, pulling Grayson along as she crossed the room, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. "What an absolutely savage bracelet! Who is the designer?" Helga Hoffmann, a woman who was famously impervious to flattery, beamed with genuine delight. "Oh, it's an Annalise, of course. She designed it just for me. The stone's inclusions are meant to represent the turmoil of the Baltic Sea near our summer home. Isn't that brilliant?" She gestured toward Annalise. "Annalise, you remember Grayson, I assume?" The air crackled. Annalise turned, her expression calm and unreadable. Her eyes met Grayson's. There was no fear, no anger, no pain. There was just a cool level assessment. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the subway. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, her voice even. "A pleasure to see you again. Cassandra." The politeness of it was more insulting than any barb. She had demoted him from a husband to a mere acquaintance. "Annalise," Grayson said, forcing a cordial tone. "Quite the little business you've built. I'm impressed." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Thank you," she replied simply before turning her attention back to the Hoffmanns. "Friedrich, you were telling me about the new Kiefer acquisition." She had dismissed him. In the heart of their world, surrounded by their people, she had effortlessly and completely dismissed him. He and Cassandra stood there for a moment suddenly, outsiders in the conversation. They were the ones left in the awkward silence. Later that night, back in their hotel suite overlooking the ocean, the facade crumbled. "This is ridiculous," Cassandra spat, unclasping her diamond bracelet and tossing it on the dresser. "Everyone was fawning over that woman, over her rocks and twigs. Helga Hoffmann looked at my bracelet like it was from a department store. "It's a bubble, Cass," Grayson said, pacing the room. But he didn't believe it anymore. He had seen the look in Friedrich Hoffmann's eyes, deep respect. He had seen the genuine passion in Helga's face. Annalise wasn't selling jewelry. She was selling a new form of status, one that his money, his name couldn't easily buy. Worse, she was rewriting their history. In her narrative, he was the villain, the blind fool who cast out the princess and her magic stone. He was a footnote in her heroic rise. The thought was intolerable. The name Vanderbilt was supposed to crush others, not be a stepping stone for them. Her success is an insult to us, Cassandra continued, her voice rising. To your family. She's making a mockery of you, Grayson, and you're just letting her be. The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. He looked out at the dark ocean, his reflection a faint scowling ghost in the glass. Cassandra was right. This wasn't a game anymore. Annalise wasn't just an ex-wife with a lucky hobby. She was a rival whose very success was built on his failure of vision, on his moment of public cruelty. And a Vanderbilt does not tolerate a rival. No, he said, turning from the window, his eyes cold and hard. I'm not letting her. The irritation had now curdled into a dark, calculated resolve. It was time to remind Annalise Rosenthal what real power looked like. It was time to put the Alchemist of Soho out of business. The first attack was subtle, a whisper campaign launched into the echo chamber of New York's high society. It began with Cassandra Davenport at a ladies' luncheon for the New York City Ballet. I do worry about Annalise, she'd say to a table of influential women, her brow furrowed with faux concern. She's working with such included stones. A friend in the industry told me she's essentially buying up other brands' rejects and marketing them as unique. And it's clever, I suppose, but is it honest? The poison spread. Rumors began to circulate. Annalise uses inferior quality gems. The artisanal look is just a cover for poor craftsmanship. She's a one-trick pony whose fad is about to fade. These whispers were designed to erode the most valuable asset a luxury brand has, its integrity. Annalise and Isabel Moreau saw the dip in sentiment almost immediately. A handful of tentative inquiries were quietly withdrawn. A fashion blogger with close ties to Cassandra's social circle wrote a snide post questioning the true value of Annalise's pieces. This is Grayson, Annalise said, sitting across from Isabel in the Soho atelier. The city bustled below, but a chill had entered their sanctuary. This has his fingerprints all over it. He can't attack the success, so he's attacking the foundation. It's amateurish, Isabel replied, her fingers steepled, but effective in a small pond. We are not in a small pond. We ignore it. We rise above. Our work is our rebuttal. But Grayson was just warming up. When the whispers didn't work fast enough, he escalated. The second attack was a direct legal assault. Vanderbilt family lawyers sent a cease and desist letter to the Annalise headquarters. The claim was audacious trademark infringement. Grayson's legal team argued that Annalise's use of her own name, Annalise Rosenthal, was a deliberate attempt to trade on the goodwill and public recognition she had gained while married to a Vanderbilt. They demanded she rebrand her company. It was a ludicrous claim designed not to win in court, but to bleed her dry. A prolonged legal battle against a firm like Sullivan and Cromwell could bankrupt a young company, consuming time, resources, and morale. He's trying to bury us in paperwork, Isabel fumed after a conference call with their own lawyers. He knows he'll lose, but he'll make the process so painful that we'll be forced to settle or fold. Annalise, however, felt a strange surge of adrenaline. This was not a subtle whisper. This was an open declaration of war. Fine, she said, her voice steely. Let's fight. But we don't just fight in the courtroom. We fight in the press. Isabel's eyes lit up. A counter-offensive. They leaked the cease and desist letter to a sympathetic reporter at the New York Times. The resulting article was a bombshell. Vanderbilt heir attempts to strip ex-wife of her own name. The narrative was irresistible, the powerful old-money patriarch trying to bully his self-made ex-wife. The story painted Grayson as petty and vindictive, and Annalise as a David fighting a corporate Goliath. Public opinion, especially among the professional women who formed her client base, swung decisively in her favor. Sales surged. The lawsuit became a marketing gift. Grayson was enraged. His attempt to exert power had backfired spectacularly, making him look both weak and cruel. He was chastised by his own father, Grayson Vanderbilt III, a man who valued discretion above all else. "You made a public circus, son," the old man had rasped over the phone. "You took a private matter and aired it on the front page. Handle it. Quietly." Humiliated and furious, Grayson decided to hit Annalise where she was most vulnerable, her supply chain. This was his world, the world of backroom deals, leverage, and corporate hardball. Through his family's network, he learned the names of the small independent mines and cutters Annalise cherished. The family that supplied her unheated lavender spinels from Burma. The Brazilian cooperative that sourced her unique storm-tossed tourmalines. He dispatched agents from the Vanderbilt global conglomerate. They didn't threaten. They made offers that were impossible to refuse. To the Burmese family, they offered to buy their entire output for the next 5 years, at double the price Annalise was paying, with a guaranteed distribution deal through a Vanderbilt subsidiary. To the Brazilian co-op, they offered funding for new modern equipment that would quadruple their yield in exchange for an exclusive contract. One by one, Annalise's lifelines were severed. She would call her contacts the people with whom she had built personal relationships, only to be met with apologetic, pained refusals. "Annalise, I'm sorry. The offer was too good for my family to refuse. We had to think of our future. You understand?" This blow was far more painful than the lawsuit. It was personal. Grayson wasn't just disrupting her business. He was colonizing her world, poisoning the very wells from which she drew her inspiration. The final, most crushing blow came from Antwerp. A venerable stone-cutting family, the Da Silvas, who had been instrumental in faceting her most unusual gems, sent her a formal letter terminating their relationship. They had signed an exclusive agreement with a newly formed luxury division of Vanderbilt Holdings. Annalise sat in her workshop, the letter in her hand, surrounded by sketches for a collection she could no longer produce. Her wellspring had run dry. The unique stones that were the soul of her brand were now being funneled directly into her enemy's hands. "He's not just trying to stop me," she said to Arthur Chadwick, who had come to sit with her amidst the crisis. "He's trying to become me." Arthur examined the letter. His old eyes, usually so kind, were now hard as flint. "He's a Vanderbilt. They don't create, they acquire. They see something of value, and they take it. But he's made a mistake. He thinks he's acquired your secret. He's bought your sources, your cutters. But he hasn't acquired your eye or your soul." And that evening, the industry trade publications announced the launch of a new high-end jewelry brand, Eterna, backed by Vanderbilt Holdings. Its creative director was Cassandra Davenport. Their debut collection, they announced, would feature a curated selection of the world's most unique and character-rich gemstones, a phrase lifted almost directly from Annalise's own press materials. Grayson had stolen her suppliers, her artisans, and her language. He was building a mimic, a hollow replica of her brand, but with the full weight of the Vanderbilt empire behind it. For the first time since leaving Park Avenue, Annalise felt a genuine stab of fear. She had built a beautiful, authentic kingdom. But a kingdom, no matter how beautiful, can still be starved into submission. The siege had begun. The launch of Eterna was as lavish as expected. Grayson spared no expense, hosting a spectacular event at the Musée Rodin in Paris. Cassandra Davenport, draped in a massive seafoam green tourmaline necklace, cut from the same rough that Annalise had coveted, played the part of visionary creative director. The jewelry was technically proficient, the stones were magnificent, but to a discerning eye, something was missing. The pieces were beautiful but soulless. They were like cover songs performed without any emotion. The designs were derivative, echoing the organic forms of Annalise, but lacking the narrative depth. It was a masterful imitation, but an imitation nonetheless. The market, however, is not always discerning. Backed by a relentless marketing budget, and the Vanderbilt name, Eterna, was an instant commercial force. They flooded magazines, sponsored events, and placed their jewelry on a new wave of influencers and actresses who were happy to take the Vanderbilt paycheck. They undercut Anneliese on price, able to absorb losses that would have crippled a smaller company. Anneliese's business began to feel the squeeze. Orders slowed. The buzz once hers was now shared with her corporate doppelganger. She and her team worked frantically, trying to find new sources, new stones, but Grayson's scorched earth campaign had been thorough. The niche suppliers of character-rich gems were now locked into exclusive contracts. Anneliese felt cornered, the walls of her hard-won kingdom closing in. Desperation began to creep into the corners of the Soho atelier. One night, working late, she found herself staring at the framed GIA certificate for the Rosenthal chameleon, the cheap stone that had started it all. The anger and fear coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. "He's fighting a war of attrition," she said to Isabel in an emergency meeting the next day. "He thinks he can just outspend us until we die. We can't fight him on his terms. We can't win a war of resources." "So we changed the battlefield," Isabel said, her eyes glinting. "He thinks this is about jewelry. This is about... We need to find his weakness." "And what is that?" Anneliese asked. "Every empire, no matter how grand, has cracks in its foundation," Isabel replied. "The Vanderbilt Empire is old, and old things can rot from within. We need to stop looking at Eterna and start looking at Vanderbilt Holdings." Isabel mobilized her own team of forensic accountants and corporate investigators, a discreet but lethal group she kept on retainer for just such occasions. For weeks they dug. They sifted through public filings, shareholder reports, and obscure trade journals, looking for leverage for a vulnerability. At first, the Vanderbilt Empire seemed impregnable, a fortress of blue-chip stocks, real estate, and diversified assets. But then they found it, a small thread. Vanderbilt Holdings had heavily invested in a portfolio of shipping and logistics companies over the past decade. On the surface, it was a nod to their family's origins, but the numbers didn't quite add up. The profits reported by these subsidiaries were unusually high and consistent, almost impossibly so, given the volatility of the global shipping market. As Isabel's team dug deeper, pulling shipping manifests and cross-referencing them with customs data, a picture began to emerge. A picture of phantom cargo, of vessels listed as full that were sailing half empty, of fuel costs being artificially inflated in reports to shareholders. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a sophisticated, long-running scheme to inflate the value of the division, securing larger and larger loans against these fraudulent assets. The Vanderbilt shipping empire, the bedrock of their modern fortune, was a house of cards. And at the center of it, the one who had overseen this aggressive expansion was Grayson Vanderbilt IV. He had used this fraudulently inflated division as the financial leverage to launch Eterna. "He's been cooking the books for years," Isabel said, sliding a confidential report across the table to Anneliese. "He used the illusion of profit from his shipping division to fund the war against you. If this gets out, he won't just be humiliated. He could face SEC investigation, shareholder lawsuits, and even criminal charges. The Vanderbilt name will be dragged through the mud for a generation." Anneliese stared at the report. Here it was, a weapon of mass destruction. She could leak it. She could destroy Grayson, his career, his family's reputation. She could obliterate Eterna and everything he had built. The thought brought a grim, satisfying sense of justice. It was an eye for an eye. But as she sat with the power to ruin him, a conversation she'd had with Arthur Chadwick echoed in her mind. He had come to her, his face grim, when he first heard of the Vanderbilt counteroffensive. "There's something you should know about the Vanderbilts, Anneliese," he'd said, his voice heavy. "About Grayson's father. 40 years ago, I had a partner. We weren't just Chadwick and Sons, we were Chadwick and Bell. We had discovered a small but promising deposit of demantoid garnets in Namibia. It was to be our legacy. Grayson Vanderbilt III caught wind of it. He didn't make an offer. He used his financial power to squeeze our partners, fabricate a legal dispute over the mining rights, and bled us dry in court. He drove my partner, a good man, to bankruptcy and an early grave. He took our discovery, our legacy, for pennies on the dollar and sold it to a Russian conglomerate a year later. I lost everything but this small shop. Annalise had stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because my story was one of revenge," Arthur said, his gaze unflinching. "And I didn't want you to be driven by that. I wanted you to be driven by creation. But now you see, the son is just like the father. They are takers. They see beauty, and they consume it. They cannot build it themselves." The revelation recontextualized everything. Arthur's mentorship wasn't just kindness. It was a quiet 40-year-old quest for justice. He had seen in her a chance to foster the creation that had been stolen from him. Looking at the damning report in her hands, Annalise understood the choice before her. She could leak it and become a destroyer, just like the Vanderbilts. Or she could use the information in a different way. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything, including the one who wielded it. She hadn't built her empire to burn someone else's down. She had built it to last. "We're not going to leak it," she said to Isabel, a steely calm settling over her. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "Annalise, this is a kill shot." "I know," Annalise replied, "but if we leak it, it becomes a chaotic public scandal. The SEC gets involved, the business gets tied up in litigation for years. It's messy, and it makes us look vindictive. There's a cleaner way, a more elegant way. He used financial power to try and crush me. I'm going to use financial precision to cripple him." She picked up her phone and dialed her corporate lawyer. "I have a new acquisition target in mind," she said. "It's a mid-sized logistics and customs brokerage firm based in Rotterdam. They're called Viridian Global. I want you to begin the process immediately, and I want it to be quiet." Isabel Moreau stared at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face as she understood Annalise's plan. It was brilliant. It wasn't a loud, messy explosion. It was a silent, perfectly executed checkmate. Annalise's counteroffensive was not a frontal assault. It was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge. She didn't attack Eterna. She attacked its foundation. Working through a series of shell corporations set up by Isabel Moreau, she quietly acquired Viridian Global, a critical logistics firm controlling much of the operations at the port of Rotterdam. The day the deal closed, Viridian's new management issued a simple directive. All cargo from all clients was now subject to mandatory physical inspection. The effect on the Vanderbilt shipping division was immediate and catastrophic. The first of Grayson's ships to arrive was impounded when its manifest claiming high-value electronics was found to be a cover for a half-empty vessel filled with scrap metal. Within a week, his European shipping operations were paralyzed, his phantom profits replaced by real-world fines. As his credit lines froze and his father's fury rained down on him, Grayson scrambled to find the invisible force strangling his business. The answer arrived in 2 emails. The first contained a meticulously detailed report on 7 years of his financial fraud. The second contained a time and an address. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Soho Atelier. When Grayson walked into the light-filled sanctuary of the Annalise headquarters, he was a defeated man. Annalise stood waiting for him, the picture of calm control. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My terms are not negotiable," she stated, her voice even and cool. "First, Eterna will be dissolved. You will transfer all its assets, including the inventory of stones you stole to me. You will pay all penalties. Second, Vanderbilt Holdings will make a substantial anonymous donation to a foundation I am establishing to support independent female designers. You will fund the very artists you sought to crush." She paused, letting the words land. "Finally, you will stay out of my world. If you ever interfere with my life or business again, this fraud report goes directly to the US Attorney. Is that understood?" Defeated Grayson could only nod. He turned and walked out, a king dethroned in the quiet of his rival's palace. Months later at the Met Gala, where her humiliation had begun, Annalise stood as a co-chair of the event. She wore a simple gown, her only adornment, a new masterpiece of her own design, with the Rosenthal chameleon floating at its center, its sunset fire captivating all who saw it. Across the room, she briefly saw Grayson, a solitary figure on the fringe of a world that was no longer his. Their eyes met for a second. There was no triumph in her gaze, only the quiet finality of a war won. She had built her empire not on revenge, but on a foundation of undeniable worth. Annalise's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was a powerful testament to resilience, vision, and the radical act of defining your own worth when the world tells you that you have none. She transformed a moment of profound public humiliation into the cornerstone of a legacy, proving that true value isn't dictated by brand names or price tags, but by passion, authenticity, and an unwavering belief in oneself. Her story reminds us that the things others dismiss as cheap or flawed can often hold the most incredible world-changing potential. It's a lesson in looking closer, seeing the magic that others miss, and having the courage to build a kingdom from the stones they throw at you. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate checkmate? Was it more powerful than simply exposing him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were inspired by her incredible story of transformation, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of incredible triumphs.